We all know it. We see it and hear it every time we play. The legendary "You Died" that plagues every Soulsborne Ring game. Now that we met our end, there is just one question. Who will give me the best eulogy, aka funeral speech? Luckily, there are 26 candidates who could possibly give me my eulogy. I need someone who can give this speech of me that inspires fond memories of me, invokes feelings of nostalgia, celebrates my life, is organized well, shows the speaker cared for me, and allows the listeners to miss me when I'm gone. And before we dive in, I'll only be going over the main bosses of the first Dark Souls and its DLC, so no mini-bosses. Sorry, Butcher. And of course, I understand that we as a character are undead and therefore would just be revived at the nearest bonfire. I like to think that the bosses would still hold a funeral and say a few words for me before I charge back in to fight them for the 82nd time. Now, as always, let's hop right in and see who is a eulogy extraordinaire and who is a funeral fiend. So here we are once again. To start things off, we'll be going in alphabetical order on this tier list. So first up on this tier list is the goated knight himself, Artorius the Abyss Walker. So I think Artorius can be ranked at different tiers based upon when exactly we address him in his point in life. Do we talk about him at the time when he is one of the main knights of Gwyn's army, or when he threw his shield to protect Sif, or when he became fully corrupted by the Abyss? For this video, I'm going to rank him and any bosses later in this video at the time that the Chosen Undead meets them. So we find Artorius, one limp arm, corrupt as can be, trying to just survive. After he beats the tar out of me, he now has to deliver a eulogy to all my loved ones. Would he be capable? I think his mind will be in shambles from the corruption, and he would not have much to say that would make much sense in the slightest. I think he would still be able to convey some sort of emotion and maybe some chivalry about another warrior's passing. He wouldn't be organized, but he would convey some sort of emotion and meaning behind it, and I think that's all right. So his speech wouldn't be fantastic in terms of order or something like that, but the heart would be there. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to start off by placing the corrupted Artorius the Abyss Walker into the B tier. I think his eulogy would be scattered, but would be an okay one nonetheless. So now we find ourselves with the legendary beginning area boss, the Asylum Demon. Now we all know the Asylum Demon loves to beat up literally any and all undead who try to leave the Asylum. I think the Asylum Demon doesn't care too much for pretty much anything that is living besides itself. It just likes to smash and destroy. I find that the Asylum Demon would only deliver a eulogy for someone if they were forced to by the Beta Chaos or something. It may at least have some quote-unquote fond memories of me, which it is looking at the Chosen Undead through the cracks in the wall or cell door and watching us just sit in the corner of the cell and maybe laughing at us or something. I do not think it would have any sort of organizational skills, nor would invoke too many feelings. I think the Asylum Demon would be as monotone as possible and simply just not care and want to go back to the Undead Asylum so it can go patrolling and it can go smashing. So I'm sorry for you tutorial boss fans out there, but I'm going to have to place the Asylum Demon all the way at the bottom into the F tier. Moving on, we now have everyone's all-time favorite platforming boss that has zero issues whatsoever. Zero people, come on, the Beta Chaos. Being the former Witch of Izalith and two of her children, the Beta Chaos has zero seance of humanity and care. It only produces demonic creations that we are forced to deal with the entire game. I find that the Beta Chaos is one of those candidates that if it were to give a eulogy about me, the people listening to it would 1000% question why they are giving it and not literally any other person in the room. There's no order, no sympathy, no words that could be said that would make people feel anything besides confusion as to why the giant creature is delivering a speech of any kind. With all that being said, we know that the Beta Chaos makes it into the F tier for the upteenth time in a tier list. At this point, you have to slightly feel bad for it, but then you fall into the giant hole in front of it and suddenly you feel no sympathy for it whatsoever. Next up, we find ourselves attempting to ring the first Bell of Awakening, where we find its defenders, the Bell Gargoyles. Now, of course, the Bell Gargoyles would have a heart of stone, as they are literally made out of stone. I think they would at least invoke some feelings of nostalgia, remembering all the good times of when you finally get the first to about half health, and then the second one comes to burn you to a crisp, somehow making your skin look worse than when you're hollow. Now, I do not think that either gargoyle would care for me all that much, but I do think they would at least let the audience know that they will miss me, as they will have to once again just perch themselves on the ledge and watch and wait for something to happen. They also can be somewhat organized, as of course they like to attack in some sort of cooperative form, so there's some seance of organization there. Overall, I do not think that the Bell Gargoyles would be sentimental about me as a person, but would sentiment about the fun times they had putting me inside the casket in front of them. So overall, they would at least be okay-ish, but not great. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place the Bell Gargoyles into the C tier. So now we have the single-eyed fellow, the Black Dragon Colam. Colam is one whose lore is... it's kind of a bit lacking, and therefore it's somewhat hard to judge. We know that it is a surviving ancient dragon that has gone through a lot of stuff over the years, in which it brings experience in different worldviews that could be used when I lay resting in that casket. Maybe Colam can recover how it whooped up on me, probably not feeling too remorseful or anything, but at least can bring up some philosophies that may or may not be best to present at a funeral of all places. So there isn't too much more to be said about Colam, and I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place it into the C tier as well. I find it to be okay and also not okay at the same time. It just depends on what philosophies it really brings up. So now we have another demon spawned from the Beta Chaos. We have the Kaber Demon. Now immediately, I think the Kaber Demon just does not care and is probably a war veteran from the war with Gwyn and the Silver Knights. I think the Kaber Demon is capable of respecting me as a warrior, but otherwise does not seem to show too much concern about my demise. It might miss sending their dogs after me once I entered that stupid confined space. Maybe it misses swinging those big cleavers at me while trying to run up that one stairwell. Maybe it simply does not care. I think it can at least organize okay, as it does have to maintain and take care of the 2 attack dogs it has, but otherwise it doesn't seem to have too much going for it. I think people attending my funeral will leave with a frown on their face, not because I am now 6 feet under, but because they had to listen to an overall pretty bad eulogy. So I'm going to keep the Kaber Demon at least out of the F tier, but I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place it into the D tier. So now we move on to the Demon Ruins, where we find the youngest child of the Witch of Izalith, the Ceaseless Discharge. Now instantly we know that the Ceaseless Discharge contains emotions that care and mourn for the loved lost, as he watches over the grave of his sister with care and consideration. I know that that big fella is more than capable of invoking feelings of fondness and nostalgia about the ones he loves and cares for. But the issue is, what do we do to initiate the boss fight? We basically desecrate the gravesite, and so we know that the Ceaseless Discharge would not think too fondly of us in particular while giving the eulogy. But I still think that the Discharge would know that we are doing that for a reason, and therefore maybe could look past it all and still invoke those feelings for the loved and lost. Now, he may be a bit too hot in terms of temperature and does spout lava at every given moment, so that's a downside. But I think the Ceaseless Discharge would be one of the better candidates to deliver my eulogy, even though he will probably not particularly be fond of this particular undead. I'm not going to place him into the highest tier, but I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place the Ceaseless Discharge all the way into the A tier. So moving on, we now have the Centipede with the sweet orange charred bling on, the Centipede Demon. I find it pretty dang difficult to note any real positive aspects of the Centipede Demon giving a funeral speech after it burned me to a crisp 10 seconds ago. I don't think it would care. I don't think it would speak about anything except how it whooped me by throwing them dumb fireballs when it was one hit away from being defeated. It would cause some commotion and simply point and laugh at my closed casket while my fellow companions look on in awe. I mean, overall, the Centipede Demon seems to be one of the worst candidates to give a eulogy. So, Centipede Demon, say hello, of course, to F tier. So now we move on to the bottom of everyone's oh-so-favorite Blight Town, where we find the Chaos Witch Quog, who I think is a bit of a doozy. Now, on the sentimental side, she gathers humanities to give to her sister, who she obviously loves pretty dang much. After all, she decides to square up and beat the crap out of anyone and anything to get more humanity. But on the other side, though, she only really cares about her sister and not really anybody else, including me, who is inside one very fine, well-crafted coffin. I find that Quog would be rather thoughtful and organized in her thoughts and ideas during her speech, but she wouldn't be too sentimental towards me. I think she's capable of spewing out facts about me, such as where I've been, what I did for work, how weak my strength faith build was, and so on. But it wouldn't have her heart put into it. She wouldn't cry on stage or bring anyone else to any super strong emotions unless I was somehow the fair lady instead. So overall, she wouldn't be the best nor the worst, but I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place Chaos Witch Quog into the B tier. So up next, we enter the Painted World and meet the famous Crossbreed Priscilla. Now, I think Priscilla has one of the purest hearts throughout Dark Souls, at least in terms of bosses, as she describes the inhabitants of the Painted World as peaceful, and we all know that's not true. So she clearly sees the good in all. I find that she would give one of the most heartfelt speeches during the funeral that would leave everyone in complete shambles. I think she would see the good in us, chosen undeads, and would even understand why we attacked her in the first place, knowing we wanted that dang tail of hers to be a dagger. She would care for us during both life and the afterlife, and would let her thoughts of love and compassion flow through her, delivering the most elegant and well-versed eulogy. So I see no issue here, and I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place Crossbreed Priscilla all the way at the top into the S tier. So now we move on to the Lonesome Deity left in Anor Londo, Dark Sun Gwendolyn. So immediately I think of Gwendolyn's upbringing and how rough he had it due to old Gwyn. But he was still loyal and caring, both to Gwyn and his sister Guinevere, which speaks volumes about him. Now, he would think of the chosen undead, the one who trespasseth unto the great lord's tomb, as someone who needed to be punished, which of course, he did so accordingly. I think Gwendolyn is capable of being very thoughtful and organized in his speech, but I do not think he would look too kindly upon me after that whole incident. He would say something like, "We gatheredeth here today to share the life story this undead hath lived. May his foolishness be remembered throughout the lands far and wide." I think Gwendolyn does share some sympathy with me, but it would be sympathy towards how dumb I was to traverse that fog wall. So overall, Gwendolyn would be pretty good, I think, but not perfect, as he would not care for me too greatly. He would only feel bad for how dumb I was trying to dodge those arrows he loves shooting all the time. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna place Dark Sun Gwendolyn. I'm gonna keep him away from the S tier, but I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna place him into the A tier. So up next, we have the rehashed Asylum Demon that's on fire, the Demon Fire Sage. Now, what the Demon Fire Sage has in comparison to its tutorial predecessor is that it cared to protect its ruined home of the Demon Ruins in Lost Isolith, and even learn some sweet sorceries from its mama. So I find that the Demon Fire Sage has at least some sort of understanding of what compassion and sympathy are, so it may be able to understand why I attempted to go past it and not just collect 30 humanity and take the Chaos Servant shortcut because we're lazy. I do not think that the Demon Fire Sage would care too much about delivering my eulogy though, and would probably just want to go back to defending its territory. It also is born from the Flames of Chaos too, so we know there's not an organized thought or skill going on in that noggin up there. I am going to keep it out of the F tier due to it protecting something and at least caring. I feel like it could somehow reflect that through the eulogy, but I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place the Demon Fire Sage into the D tier. So now we all remember the legendary golden duo, Dragon Slayer Ornstein and Executioner Smo. Which way was the chosen undead defeated? Was it by the big hammer, the long spear, or of course the round posterior of Smo landing on top of us when it's a 1v1? You decide how the chosen undead met his fate. Now I am ranking this dynamic duo together, and therefore again this is going to be a bit of a doozy. On one side we have the honorable Ornstein, who is the captain of the 4 knights, who are esteemed and honorable knights of Anor Londo, and on the opposite side we have Smo, who delights in executions and eating, well, you know. So I find that Ornstein would be the main speaker during this funeral, and Smo would just stare at the casket, and some people speculate that they saw drool coming from his helmet. Now, if this were the case, some people would be hyper-fixated on Smo, and others would be hyper-fixated on Ornstein, as he has one of the coolest armor sets in the whole dang game. I find that the eulogy would be pretty decent if Ornstein does most of the talking, and that Ornstein would be honorable and give me respect and bury me with full honors afterwards. He would claim I was a worthy opponent, even though I was finished 34 seconds into the fight. So overall, Dragon Slayer Ornstein and Executioner Smo will be placed into the B tier. Honestly, this one could go higher and lower on this tier list. It just kind of depends on the situation though. So now we move on to the 4 fellas submerged underwater deep in the abyss, the 4 kings. The 4 kings are of course organized in their thoughts and ideas, as they were leaders of some country before, and they're organized in their attacks when I fight them. So of course they wouldn't really argue amongst one another. I do think that they have lost their compassion and care long ago, and probably wouldn't care to give a speech about me as my casket. It's in the abyss with them, so it has a giant ring around it. That funeral would basically have to take place in the abyss if they gave the eulogy, and so those who wanted to attend would need to somehow get their hands on a covenant of Artorius, and would all the furniture like need a covenant as well? But I digress. I find that the 4 kings would use their governing minds to come up with some super formal speech, but it would lack the heart to really do anything worthwhile. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place the 4 kings into the C tier. So now we move on to the lowest section of Undeadburg, where we meet the disgusting gaping dragon. Now this one seems pretty simple. I don't find it capable of any of the criteria we set out in the beginning of this video. It just eats stuff, shoots acid, and runs over the chosen undead with its legs and whatnot. I don't think it would be an open casket funeral. I don't think there'd be a body to present, since I met its ribcage mouth thing and there is no remains of me. So of course the gaping dragon is going to go all the way into the bottom, into the F tier. Now we enter the catacombs to find Gravelord Neato, ruler of the dead, and one of the sickest boss designs ever created. Now immediately Neato would obviously be accepting of my demise, stating that with life comes death, and that it was just my time to join him and his rule. I think Neato would not be emotionalist, and would sympathize for those who do not think it is my time to go. Being a Lord of the Dead, Neato would have the ultimate grasp on what it means for someone to pass, and would be thorough and well-versed in his thoughts. He even takes on all the brave humans who make the journey down all the way to his tomb to join his covenant. So we know he isn't a guy who just despises humans or anything. So with all that being said, the giant skeleton amalgamation known as Gravelord Neato would be the one that I would hope my loved ones would call upon when they need an incredible eulogy, and therefore I'm going to give him the highest honors of making it all the way into the S tier. Going from one legend to another, we now find the legend who defends her master's grave, Great Grey Wolf Sif. Of course, we have to acknowledge the sympathy that Sif has, both for her master and for us, and she picks up the great sword to ensure that no one meets the same fate as Artorius, which is awesome. I know that that big old wolf would give one of the most tear-jerking speeches about us, about what she did was to protect us, and that we were fine warriors up until the very end. Now, I know that Sif would place our tombstone also right next to Artorius's, and will protect it just as much as Artorius's. Sif may not be able to formulate actual words, but her raw emotions would convey the exact feelings she has about us. I know she would care to tell everyone about us, what we did, how we impacted her life, how she owned us with her sweet sword-slashing skills. Great Grey Wolf Sif is immediately one that I will give the highest honor of placing into the S tier as well. So moving on, we now meet the final boss who has the legendary soundtrack. We have Gwyn, Lord of Cinder. We know Gwyn is the king of Lordran and did all that stuff with the first flame by sacrificing himself and becoming a husk of his former self due to it. So once we lose to him and he finds that he is the one that has to deliver the eulogy, I think he will basically brush it off, since we are lowly humans that are also the chosen undead. Now Gwyn seems like the typical type of king that would state something like, "May he be remembered for centuries to come," and then proceed to leave the funeral and go watch and protect the first flame immediately after. People that were attending the funeral would be somewhat awestruck to meet such a famous celebrity in Lordran, but otherwise they would feel extremely disappointed after such a short, detached speech. I don't think Gwyn would evoke any positive feelings celebrating my life and accomplishments I made to get all the way to that dang chamber he's in. And I don't think he will think anything of me after he delivered his one-sentence speech. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place Gwyn, Lord of Cinder, all the way into the D tier. And I'm going to let that first flame burn out simply due to this. Write a better speech next time, and quit getting parried so easily. So now we have the Sen's Fortress final challenge, the Iron Golem. Is there much for a stoic giant armored fellow that swings an axe and is quite a bit clumsy? I don't think so. I think the Iron Golem is once again at least capable to some extent, but I do not think much of it. Maybe the Iron Golem could say something in small fractures of a sentence, saying stuff like, "Undead fight meh, should have gone for ankles," when talking about me. Now, some people emotionally attach to the strong stoic characters, so maybe some people would be moved by Iron Golem's simple words. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to place Iron Golem in the same tier as Gwyn and place it into the D tier. Now we have the DLC human gone mad and made the dark old abyss that everyone succumbed to, Manus, Father of the Abyss. Now I think the contorted mind of Manus is pretty indicative that this is going to be one terrible funeral. He might even mess with or destroy all the food at the reception, including that one casserole Cindy put all of her heart into making. So we know that Manus would be a monster and not care for just about anything and everything to do with the funeral. this one's a pretty obvious choice. Manus goes into F tier. Manus, I understand that it isn't your fault you're as mad and as crazy as you are, but don't worry about the eulogy. Someone else can do it. So now we have the most beautiful of all Dark Souls creatures. We have the Moonlight Butterfly. I know that the butterfly is a creature of few words, but it would somehow be able to captivate all who attend my funeral by looks alone. There's something to say about the creation of beauty of those green-hued wings, which could represent something beautiful about my demise too. I don't know. I'm not that inquisitive or insightful. I just make tier lists. Now, I think that the butterfly can at least attempt something, even though it may not speak actual words. Maybe it can, like, fly around and land on my casket, and then land on the podium, and then way up in the rafters, and flutter its wings, and people would cry and ponder about my life and what I did. So, overall, I'm just gonna go ahead. I'm gonna place the Moonlight Butterfly into the C tier. I think that the butterfly can invoke some strong emotions by the looks and stuff. Moving on, we come upon the punching bag of the Dark Souls 1 bosses, Pinwheel. Pinwheel is super into necromancy, and therefore I think it would instantly try and perform necromancy on me after I lost the battle, because I somehow got my butt handed by Pinwheel of all bosses. It would be a complete disaster maybe, or maybe it could at least partially resurrect me enough where I can perform my own speech and then proceed to sit back into the coffin. That's just my theory of what could happen though, and therefore I'm gonna roll with it. Of course, this would freak some people out, and others would be incredibly grateful that they got the opportunity to say their final words to me before I go back into my coffin because the necromancy wore off. I find that if this were to occur, Pinwheel would somehow be pretty decent at giving a eulogy, as it would literally be me saying what I have to say before I go. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna throw Pinwheel into the A tier. It's not gonna make it all the way to the S tier because, of course, resurrecting my body and me giving my own speech and then going back into the casket and then being buried is just unnatural and uneasy for a lot of people. It's not gonna make it to the S tier, it's gonna make it to the A tier. I feel like it'd still be a pretty good eulogy. We move on to the defendant of the Sanctuary Garden, the Sanctuary Guardian. Being an amalgamation of all sorts of different animals and whatnot, I think the Sanctuary Guardian would be entirely in tune with the natural aspect of the end of someone's life, and would overall have a great grasp on what to say and what to do that can alleviate the grieving hearts of my loved ones. I know that the Sanctuary Guardian is capable of bringing forth all sorts of emotions that people should experience during a eulogy: joy, sorrow, acceptance, wanting me to get good, etc. I think the uniqueness of the Sanctuary Guardian is what brings forth a unique perspective that leaves all who listen to think about me and remember all the good times of my awesome strength faith build. I feel like this may be an interesting one, but I feel like I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to give Sanctuary Guardian high honors of placing it into the S tier. Let that lion, goat, scorpion, bird give one epic speech. So up next, we meet the Scaleless Betrayer of the Dragons, Seath the Scaleless. Seath would immediately take up a mocking tone about my demise, claiming that if I was immortal, none of this would have happened, which is ironic considering he isn't, especially after I smashed his little primordial crystal. I think Seath would make use of my funeral as a place to point out the mortality of humans and undead, and how he is superior in every regard. I do think some valid points would be brought up though, and he would be organized in his thought process, even though his mind has probably decayed pretty dang well. But the snarky attitude that is shown during my eulogy is my main concern. With all that being said, even with the attitude, I think Seath would raise some valid points and bring up some interesting takes on mortality and whatnot. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna place Seath into the B tier. Now we meet the other demon laying underneath the undead asylum, the Stray Demon. I think you can literally copy and paste what I said about the Asylum Demon, and you'd have the exact same thing for the Stray Demon, except that it lays underneath instead of patrolling the area for undead who are trying to escape. So I'm going to cut to the chase on this one. It's going to go into the F tier as well. So lastly on this list, we have the Taurus Demon, located on that fateful bridge area that I hilariously rolled off of, just like so many others. Being once again a creature formed from the bed of chaos, I find that the Taurus Demon is similar in regards to basically all the other demon creatures I've listed before. It does at least have lesser variants of it defending the ruins of their home in the demon ruins, and therefore I too find this basically identical in characteristics of the demon Fire Sage. It would at least have some seance of understanding what it means to care for something, as it cares for its home even if it is in shambles. It would understand that I too have a goal and want to go meet the all-time best person throughout all of the franchise, Solaire Vestora. That's the most important goal. And the Taurus Demon understands that, but still has to crush me and watch me fly off the side of the arena. I'm going to keep the Taurus Demon outside of the F tier. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place it into the D tier. And there we have it. We once again have gone through and completed another legendary tier list. This prominent question that needed to be answered was finally answered. We now all know who's the best and worst at giving my eulogy throughout all the Dark Souls bosses. So now that's the end of this week's tier list. Come back next week where we move on and answer another important question that is on everyone's mind. And if you enjoyed the content, of course, I'll ask you to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, adios.